Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Jake Schuster, CEO and founder of Gemini Sports, a sports analytics platform that's raised $7 million in funding. Jake, welcome to the show.
Brett, it is great to be here.
Super excited for this. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk to us about what you're building today.
Yeah, so Gemini Sports, what we do is we make it easier for sports teams to make data-driven decisions. And really what that means is we're allowing decision makers at professional, collegiate, and Olympic teams to actually work with data themselves. I was a practitioner in the elite sports world for 9 years. I was a sports scientist, and I was doing my doctorate in biomechanics with the Olympic rugby teams in New Zealand ahead of the 2016 games. I had to learn MATLAB and SQL and Python code to process force, velocity, and power profiling data. And it was awful, and I was awful at it. And I said, someone's got to make this easier. So finally, when I got the entrepreneurial itch in 2021, 2022, I looked out around the greater tech world and realized that products for so-called citizen data scientists exist in almost every industry, but sports, a lot of people don't realize, are decades behind your Fortune 500 industries. And part of that is because these organizations are kind of just overgrown family offices with really expensive assets that they put on fields to run around in shorts and then, throw or kick a ball. But the executive management of these teams is not as professionalized or not as sophisticated as financial services or manufacturing or military. And so they don't have modern technologies that they're using to equip their day-to-day workflows. So what we do is we provide a really easy to use mobile application that allows general managers of sports teams to find better players, because every team needs to find the best players for the best prices that fit their playing style, that they can move on from their roster in a few years for a profit. And this is kind of just a math problem, but it's one that teams aren't very well staffed to do. And we've all probably seen the film Moneyball. But hiring smart people who do things on computers is just one step. You have to equip them with technology, but even more so, you have to bring those insights into the decision makers' hands, and we do that.
Why is that sports is behind? Why do solutions like this exist in other industries, but not for sports?
I think it's just a very small and insular world where ownership groups they have been traditionally family offices, like single high net worth individuals that buy and manage these assets and run them kind of in the way that they've run their own businesses. Whereas nowadays there's huge private equity investments and much more sophisticated investment groups coming in, often ones that come from the financial services world or other industries that involve more advanced data practices.
Talk to us about the first, let's say 6 months of the company. What did the first 6 months look like?
Building something that I thought we would build a lot faster than we did and realizing that nobody wanted it. So, I
relate to that.
Yeah. So, I think the first thing we did was build a faster horse by accident. So we didn't have clarity on who our target user was. We were hedging, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone, in between kind of the data worker, so to speak, the data scientist, the analyst, and the general manager, the technical director, the non-technical user who's an executive making roster management decisions. And the data people, they have such an important role at these teams in providing insights and working on the most sophisticated problems, but they don't want to leave their Python workflows. It's not up to us to convince them to join a totally different no-code workflow like we've seen Amazon SageMaker or Data Robot or Dataiku or some of these platform plays in the data world. And they've become very, very highly valued products, but they've never really found product market fit because data scientists either get it or they don't in terms of automating their machine learning processes. And it's not an exciting enough painkiller to be a vertical SaaS solution. What we have realized is that those decision makers at sports teams, and again, not to be ageist, but that increasingly there's a generation of sports executives who have a finance background or know their way around SQL and Excel, and they want to be able to touch the data themselves. They don't want to just have people bring insights to them. They want to be able to interface with that data. And those users want a product that's user-friendly. They want a product that's in their pocket. They want a product that allows them to explore insights and explore data outputs in a way that they just can't today. And so really our first 6 to 12 months of inception were failed experiments where we were building nice to have products for users that weren't interested in changing their workflow. And once we realized that we can move towards greener grass, things sped up a lot.
What was it like when you had that final moment, that final realization of like, shit, we've built a product that there's not going to be demand for and we're going to have to change? Like, what was that like? Because I know a lot of founders, or probably most founders, have that moment, and they're hard moments. And some founders, I think, are so focused on making it work that they are never able to make the pivot and the company doesn't go anywhere. What was that like for you?
Yeah, well, with all the empathy in the world to people who end up in those situations, I don't think we had that realization until about 6 months ago. And thankfully, we've been able to move very fast since then. Well, I think you described it, right? Is typically one is so used to being doggedly determined to make things work in all ways that they are too stubborn in this arena. And I was certainly there. So I think it was kind of staring at us for a while, and it took a long time, and then it happened all at once.
What's that saying? Like suddenly, then all at once, I think is the
Exactly.
phrase.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, after you've made the pivot, when did it start to really feel like there was traction, that there was demand for this product?
I think that the thing that made that clear for me is when we would finish a product discovery or demo call with a general manager and they would follow up unsolicited, texting me, I think you're onto something really special here. And that's happened a number of times in the past couple months. And, when you're kind of finishing each other's sentences or where they're bringing you ideas that you've already thought of or put in the roadmap, that's how I knew. And I think when this is going to sound funny, but when our target users are no longer defaulting to setting up a follow-up call with someone else to validate what we're doing, when they feel good enough about what they're doing, if there are those validation checks, they're part of due diligence. They're not a necessary barrier to proceeding with a deal.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
What about the market category? So when it comes to like sports analytics, is that a line item that most of these sports teams are already going to have, and then you're just trying to make sure that you can be that line item? Or do you have to go out there and convince them that, hey, you need to have a sports analytics line item?
Yeah, good question. So teams are already doing sports analytics. That means something different to everyone, but they'll have at least a couple of full-time hires and they'll have purchased data. But our product itself is not a line item. We're not replacing an incumbent. This is a new workflow. This is a new way of thinking about things. And personally, Brett, I think if that's made this journey be on hard mode, I think it sounds cool and it's easier to pitch venture capitalists and saying that you're doing something radical and something disruptive. But then you have to talk to prospects who have to create budget out of thin air. And so we're pretty seasonal sports. They'll buy during the off season. You've got a pretty tight window when budgeting can happen. And someone that you're selling to has to explain to someone else what you're doing and why you exist and why you cost as much as you do. So we're a completely new item and new thing in the budget for teams.
How do you get people to do that then? That's always like the struggle that I think a lot of founders have. What have you learned from getting people to establish that line item and make that change?
Yeah, two things. And I think you have to feel out each situation to decide which is appropriate when. One is compare and contrast. And we're not here to replace data scientists, but in a lot of cases, there are roles that teams might have to hire in the near future that have been on their to-do list for a little while that they no longer have to because of us. And so there's that. So we speak about, look, and even just to anchor your price, right? So to say, look, if we're charging X, that's similar to what if you hired another person in this department, it would cost you. And that's going to add more value than that would. The other way is just being really, I've found, kind of candid and vulnerable around pricing and saying, look, here's what we've gotten someone else to pay. If that number is going to be prohibitive to you doing a deal, let's figure out a number that works for you now. And, I'm not looking forward to explaining that at Series A when someone's doing long division around our ACVs. But I think at some point collecting logos is more important than your ARR because of network effect in such a niche vertical like this. And so for us, I have to develop a rapport with the buyer and figure out what's going to get a deal done without completely selling ourselves out or sacrificing how we resource customer success. So I think it's just been about finding a number that works for everyone.
From a marketing perspective, how would you summarize the marketing approach and marketing strategy?
I'll let you know when I figure that one out. But I think, look, educating the market is the hardest thing that we do right now because there's almost these kind of like haves and have nots around when teams are quote unquote doing analytics. They've probably formed fairly strong opinions on how it can and should be done. And we're here to tell them that there's a different way that they can do it. And if they're not engaging in analytics, then they're probably not interested in the first place. So there's a needle to thread there where we can say, look, the mathematical approaches are pretty similar for anyone who's doing this, but the user experience and the workflows within your org that can drive you there, it's time to rethink those. So I would just say that educating the market is the big one. And then really, I guess you would call it like event marketing, just getting in the right rooms with the right people has been key for us.
What about your podcast? So, as a fellow podcaster, obviously I love podcasting, as you can probably gather from being on this. Talk to us about your podcast. Talk to us about the marketing objectives of the podcast, and then any outcomes that you've seen so far from hosting the podcast.
Yeah, so I host a podcast called Winning with Data. I was trying to think before we got online. I think we've done around 30 episodes so far. And my focus there, we do interview some people from within the sports world, which is cool and fun. But for the most part, our aim there is actually to interview people who have big roles in data or work in and around data products to frankly just provide an educational opportunity for sports executives to understand kind of how things are done in more mature industries and establish like, don't listen to me, listen to these experts around just what a mature data system looks like. And that could be as simple as don't be afraid of cloud. I promise it's secure, all the way to just how automation of certain processes is advantageous, especially for smaller orgs. And how the citizen data scientist is a real thing, that decision makers should get their hands on data themselves.
If you think about your top priorities for the next, let's say, 12 months, what do those look like?
Revenue. I couldn't be more excited about the product that we've been bringing to market and its trajectory. But I would say that finding the right customers to work with us early on is no small thing. Early adopters don't grow on trees. And then you have to time their budget cycles and how you onboard them and things like that. So really bringing on board the right customers to work with us through these early phases, I think is the most front of mind priority for me right now.
How do you find early adopters? Like you said, they don't list that on their LinkedIn, unfortunately. How do you find early adopters?
I think it's more about allowing people to eliminate themselves and show that they aren't early adopters. Sometimes you get the signs, I want something before it's ready. I want to be the first in my league to get this. I want to be influential on your product roadmap. I mean, when people say those things, fantastic. And we'll move mountains to make things happen for them. But also people just eliminate themselves. I think when someone asks for more features, when someone asks, well, can it do this? Can it do that? Oh, it's too bad. I wish it could do this thing. They're showing that they're late adopters, that they're laggards. He's crossing the chasm language. I think early adopters want to have things before they're ready. And so, if I'm at a conference and a sporting director or GM wants to learn about our roadmap, wants to learn about where we're headed, wants to learn about what features are in beta right now, that's how we find them.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
Let's talk a little bit about the founder journey. So as I'm sure you've experienced, talked about it a little bit with those pivots. The journey is not just all the highs that you read about in the media. There's a lot of lows on that journey as well. What's been the lowest point for you and how did you navigate that point?
So I'll give two. When we raised our pre-seed, we didn't raise anywhere near enough. Money was free. I thought we would go to market quickly because I didn't know any better. And so we paid the price on the back end of that where we were raising seed on that much traction. And I mean, it was good traction to raise a seed, but it wasn't, knock your socks off traction. And we were doing that while running out of money. So it was the 43rd investor that I pitched that said yes and wrote us a term sheet to lead our seed round. And I don't know, probably 3 out of the most recent 10 payrolls, I didn't know on the day of if it was going to happen. I was calling our angel investors, asking them to double down. It was really painful. And then, we got through it and it's easy to talk about now, but it was really hard at the time.
What about the fact that you're a non-technical solo founder? I feel like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that would have been rare. I've been speaking with a lot of founders. That's becoming more and more common. How do you think about navigating this world?
I've gotten used to having a chip on my shoulder. I'm always feeling there's something I don't know or something that I should be able to figure out. It's been unusual, obviously, hiring all of my early engineers rather than having one as a technical co-founder. I've been fortunate to have a leader emerge internally who's been around the business for a long time, who's kind of taken that place. But I think one of the most interesting things that I have is I get to take advantage of my own naive. And by that, I mean, I don't know what is or isn't possible technologically. So I get to communicate my ideas and my ambitions in a way that isn't restricted. And then my engineers can tell me if it's possible or not. So I really enjoy that. And I really enjoyed how that allows me to look at the problem solution set that we provide for our users in a way that's not influenced by current limitations of technology.
What about fundraising lessons? So throughout this whole journey, what have you learned so far?
You can never stop getting clearer and clearer about who you are, what you do, how you make money, and how you'll provide returns for your investors. You can often think that you have those answers or that you've been clear about those answers, and then investor will ask you 5 minutes after you think you've told them. So one can always get clearer and clearer and even just repeat themselves around that. The other thing I'd say is just those topics specifically, if you haven't landed the plane on those, then you're probably going to get flaked on or ghosted. So you have to communicate how you're going to make money, how you're going to provide an exit opportunity for your investors, and why they should be investing. And I think I would just say perseverance and never getting your hopes up too high about any individual investor is what allows you to kind of emotionally survive the process. I mean, the number of times I thought we finally had our lead for our seed and we didn't, you just have to keep going.
What about the sports tech category in general? Are you finding investors who are very focused on that space, or are you convincing investors who weren't previously looking at sports tech to say, okay, yeah, let's back some companies here?
So, it's funny, for a long time, we kind of struck out with a lot of the traditional sports tech investors because a lot of those actually are more B2C oriented, more athlete facing, more fan facing. So we're kind of unusual for them. And so I almost kind of wrote off that world and spent more time and energy convincing VCs who are a little bit more market size, a little bit more TAM sensitive, and ran into resistance there. And at the end of the day, I've ended up with not only some of the best sports tech specific investors out there, but some pretty traditional VCs as well. So I find it kind of funny how that played out. I think that the sports tech world is very strange. I don't know, there's just not a great precedence for exits and for outcomes in team facing operation side products. But that's because nobody in that world has ever operated like a true tech company. And we're pretty well timed, Brett, for how there's increasing sophistication and increased institutional investment into sports teams, allowing venture capital groups and institutional investors to look at products in that category differently. So I think we'll see that world change. I think, frankly, our future investors will mostly be vertical SaaS oriented, maybe data product oriented venture capitalists. Whereas, we've got, if you total up the LPs of our current investor groups, whether they're family offices, or VCs with team owners as LPs, we've actually got 27 different sports team owners that have invested in us, but I never aimed for that.
Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like for the company?
I think one of the most exciting things about Gemini is that we can be acquired by a lot of different types of groups. It could be a private equity group, obviously. It could be a data platform giant. It could be a workflow tool giant. It could be an AI company that acquires us, or even a management consulting company, the way that McKinsey gobbles up vertical SaaS companies. So I think we have a lot of exit opportunities coming our way. I think what will be really interesting for me leading the company is how far and wide do we want to grow it before that moment? Because not only is there a lot of opportunity to land and expand with teams where if we start with kind of the roster management piece and that certain type of user, we can expand across tactics and player performance and a lot of other areas that can be serviced. But also, it's a big sports world. And I randomly in my career worked in a lot of kind of niche sports, rugby, cricket, tennis, golf, track and field. And so there's a lot of different sports that can take advantage of this. It's not just the big North American sports. So I see us expanding pretty far and pretty wide until we have a vertical acquisition opportunity.
Amazing. I love it. Love the vision. I really love this conversation. We are up on time, so we're going to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with your journey, where should we send them?
Yeah, GeminiSports.ai is our website. Jake@GeminiSports.ai is my email. And because I'm a huge fan of Paul Newman and the film Cool Hand Luke, I named my Twitter 100 years ago Cool Hand Jake GS, which is my initials.
Amazing. Jake, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.